This is an unusual story about the disappearance of children and babies, investigated by Gamal al-Maliki of Al Jazeera's Arabic channel. It dates back to the early years of Israel and is about discrimination, division, and deception. Babies and young Jewish children from Yemen and a smaller number from other Arab countries and the Balkans disappeared under the eyes of the Israeli authorities over a 6-year period. They appear to have been taken from their families and given up for adoption.
The babies were taken in the middle of the night without parents' consent, when parents were not there.
And it's strongly suspected that in many cases, the children that ultimately disappeared were in fact given up for adoption in this way. This wasn't an accident. These weren't mistakes. This was a system.
Babies are a product, so it was a systemic business. You thought that they are saving Yemeni Jews from themselves.
When Israel was founded in 1948, it encouraged Jews to immigrate there from around the world, including Yemen. Operation Magic Carpet relocated nearly 50,000 Jews from Yemen to the new state of Israel in just over a year. This followed the expulsion of over 750,000 Palestinians, forcibly displaced in the Nakba in 1948. But Operation Magic Carpet held a dark secret that has still only partially been revealed, involving at least 2,000 children, what are called Yemenite babies. Yemenite refers to Jews of Yemeni heritage, and all these children disappeared after their arrival in Israel from Yemen. What happened to these children? Was this state-sanctioned child trafficking? And where are these grown men and women now? Gamal al-Maliki from Al Jazeera Arabic's program The Investigator is from Yemen. He and his team traveled extensively to seek answers to these questions to the Middle East, Europe, and North America. In Boston, Massachusetts, he met a Jewish author and academic of Yemeni descent who's researched what's known as the Yemenite Children Affair.
Sushana, how are you?
Good, good. Welcome.
Thank you so much, thank you so much.
To speak about story that was, for me, very personal, but I also wanted to research it and treat it as an academic matter. For me, this started with hearing about stories of two aunts of mine, Ammati Hamama wa Ammati Sadeh. They were both my father's sisters. And for both of them, their babies were taken away from them back in 1949. And especially one of them had a very shocking story where her child was taken away from her arms.
Gamal asked about the relocation of Jews from Yemen to Israel.
After the establishment in 1948, and from the end of 48 to 49, the state airlifted 50,000 Yemeni Jews from Yemen, and they were situated, when they got to Israel, in different absorption camps. It's called ma'barot in Hebrew. So different places around the country where they were brought to. And because they told the people that arrived that because they were housed in tin houses and tents, that the babies would be better off if they went to the baby house, which was built out of stone, that it would be safer for them, and that the parents can come and nurse their babies 3 times a day.
Dr. Tom Pessa is an Israeli sociologist and activist. He too has campaigned on behalf of the Yemenite children who went missing in the late 1940s and 50s.
נאמר להם שהילד, באופן הדפוס הכי נפוץ, נאמר להם שהילד נפטר, ילד או ילדה נפטרו, בדרך כלל מדובר בילדים צעירים, נמסר להם שהילדים נפטרו, לא ראו גופה, לא נמסרה תעודת פטירה, ויש סימנים שונים שמעידים שהילדים האלה לא נפטרו. זאת אומרת, למשל, במיעוט מהמקרים ההורים השתוללו ואיימו על הצוות והפגינו קצת לחץ, ובעקבות הלחץ שלהם, פתאום הילדים המתים פתאום חזרו לחיים והושבו אליהם, כשהם לבושים בבגדים מאוד יפים. זאת אומרת, זה היה נראה כאילו שהכינו אותם למסירה למישהו אחר.
In most common scenarios, the babies were taken in the middle of the night without parents' consent, when parents were not there, and the next day they were told that they got sick and they were taken to a hospital, and then from there, essentially, they were never brought back. So they would be told that they died, and then most cases, the parents didn't see a death certificate or a grave, didn't get to mourn their babies.
השיא של התופעה הזאת זה בתחילת שנות ה-50, אבל יש לנו עוד משנות ה-30 ועד שנות ה-70 עדויות. לפי הערכות שלנו מדובר, אנחנו יודעים על, יש לנו עדויות נגיד של 1,000 ילדים באתר שלנו. אני חושב בספר של דוקטור נתן שיפריס שיצא לפרשה, מדובר משהו כמו 2,000. אנחנו מעריכים שכמובן לא כל המקרים הגיעו אלינו, אז מדובר כנראה על כמה אלפי ילדים.
Interest in the Yemenite Children Affair stretches well beyond the Middle East. In London, the Empty Cradles exhibition highlighted the plight of these children. It was staged at London's School of Oriental and African Studies, known as SOAS, in December 2022. The London exhibition used photographic archive and graphic reconstructions to tell the stories of the Jewish babies who went missing. The result is a piece-by-piece timeline of events.
This reflects the multi-stage process by which children were removed from their parents and ultimately perhaps given away. It begins in the immigration camps, or Sha'ain and Shemel, Atlit, others, where the children were systematically removed from their parents and placed in baby homes in the camps or in children's hospitals in the camps. They stayed there for normally a short while, and then they will be moved, often together, often at night, often without telling the parents that this was happening, to hospitals in major towns and cities. Parents struggled to try and find them in the hospitals, but they were not given the information or the means to travel there. And even if they did, they were met with hostility. And it's strongly suspected that in many cases, the children that ultimately disappeared were in fact given up for adoption in this way.
Al Jazeera wanted to speak to people directly affected, the families of Yemenite Jewish children taken from their parents and raised by Israeli families. They tracked down some of them, but then, one by one, they each declined to be interviewed.
والله خبر مش كويس للأسف الآن الضيفة اتصلت من يومين تتلقى مكالمات وتهديد لما علموا أنها يعني ستظهر معنا.
احنا محتاجين نعرف هذه الضيفة اللي كانت متحمسة فجأة اعتذرت اليوم قبل التصوير بساعتين، لماذا؟
اللي حصل هو قالوا لا احنا ما نعمل المقابلات وانت اذا عملتي سنقاطعك.
احنا كنا نوصل مع 4 فرق قبله ووصلوا للنقطة اللي هي هذه وهربوا هم ويختفوا من الصورة.
The same happened in the following days. Families and victims in Israel agreed to speak, but then changed their minds. Finally, one woman did agree to appear on camera. She hadn't seen her sister Rachel since she was a tiny baby, barely a month old.
לי קוראים בתיה יצחקי, נולדתי בתימן, הגעתי לארץ בגיל 5, ואחרי זה נולדה רחל, והיא הייתה כבר בגיל 28 יום, כי אמרו שאסור להשאיר תינוקות בתוך העולים, חייבים לשים אותם בבית תינוקות. אמא הלכה להניק אותה כל כמה שעות, ובאותו יום, לדאבוננו, כשהייתה כבר בת 28 יום, היא ישבה והניקה את רחל בזרועותיה, ובזמן ההנקה, בשיא של ההנקה, ניגשה אליה האחות, חטפה את הילדה בחוזקה, ורצה לכיוון החוצה לאמבולנס. ואימא שלי הייתה גם בהלם, אז ישר היא קפצה והיא מהר רצה אחרי האישה. האחות הזאת עם התינוקת, אימא לא יכלה להשיג אותה.
It's not clear what happened to baby Rachel. There are some documents relating to her Yemeni family in Israeli archives. One is an ID card from 1949, issued to people coming to Israel from Yemen and elsewhere. It shows Batia and Rachel's parents with their arrival date as the 23rd of November, 1949. Then there's a neatly typewritten document detailing the transfer of the baby from her temporary home to a hospital. A final document from February 1950 is the child's death certificate, with the cause of death shown as pneumonia. There's a separate case of another baby from Yemen, who's also called Rachel. It's a common Jewish name. Her parents were also told she died, but they never saw her body. Decades later, this Rachel's brother is still looking for answers.
أيام وين سافرت هيتا كمو يلدا يفا بريام ملئة فاهمين شايتا ولا قد كل بعم لهنيكوتا فاهمين حدا شايتا من هيك تم تعيفات نردمت مش كيفا وتا يلام معرسلين كلا تدك ما بكيبوت مش كيفا وتا بالمحارة يمينيكاوتا فاهمين بعرف شي بيوم أحرون لاريك في توم دولتا تا عرساج لاريك إفو راحل أمرو يميتا בלי לעפעפעפעפ, בלי שום דבר, תמיד אבל זה איפה הגופה שלה? איפה הגופה? אם היא מתה. אבא מסכן היה באותו מצב, הוא היה על הפנים, הוא שמע על הבן שלו נפטר, אתה מבין? אז הוא פשוט מאוד לא, הוא לא... זה כאב לו כל כך, אתה מבין? זה חרה לו. אבל הוא אומר, אם היא מתה, מה נעשה? אבל הוא ידע. הוא אומר גם, תביאו את הגופה, נקבור אותה. לפחות, בארץ ישראל. היו אנשים ערלי לב, זה ערלי לב. פשוט מבלי מצפון.
אמא שלי ואבא שלי, עד היום, זאת אומרת, עד יום מותם, הם כל הזמן חשבו, אולי בכל זאת יראו אותה. והם כל הזמן ציפו. עד הרגע האחרון שהם יצליחו לראות אותה. אבל זה לא התקיים. שמחות כבר לא היה להם מאז. הם כל הזמן פשוט היו אבלים.
This image was taken on the inside of a plane carrying Jews from Aden, the southern tip of Yemen, to the new state of Israel. They were flown in a mass airlift in a matter of months, some 50,000 Jews. And what you can clearly see in this image is that the intervention and control over children began before they had even arrived in the state. If you read the documents of the organizations who were involved in moving Jews from Yemen to Israel, it's clear that they viewed the children as the most precious cargo to bring to the new state. And this principle you find carried through to the institutions that were created in Israel, the transit camps, the hospitals, the baby homes. It's the same logic at every step of the way.
Most of the facts surrounding this affair are not in dispute. Almost 50,000 Yemeni Jews were flown to Israel over a 15-month period. Many were babies and young children. Some died, but the vast majority survived. However, at least 2,000 simply disappeared. At this point, questions outnumber answers. Where did these missing children go? Is it possible that doctors and nurses removed Yemenite babies and put them in the hands of Israeli and American families? If so, why?
השאלה מה המוטיבציה של הקהילה הרפואית או של הממסד באותה תקופה זה שאלת $1,000,000, כי בין להגיד היה ניתוק ממוסד, לבין להגיד שהיה מישהו שמתכנן, והאם היה חטיפה, והאם היה העברת ילדים להורים אחרים וכולי, ברור שהיו גם פושעים, ואנשים שעשו מזה ביזנס, ככה נראה לי. אבל אני חושבת שהייתה אמונה, וגם היום שמדברים מי שנשאר, או אם אתה שואל היום, אנשים שבכלל לא היה להם קשר לפרשה, אבל הם חלק מהקהילה הרפואית והם מנסים לגונן עליה, אז המוטיבציה היא להגיד, רצינו לעשות טוב, הם באו ממקום עם תת-תזונה, רצינו שהם יחיו.
You see Yemenite babies being held by nurses dressed all in white, and American visitors, women, coming from the United States to visit inside this hospital. This is a very clear statement that tourists from America had better access to the children than their own mothers looking in from outside the building. Testimonies from nurses who were in the camps, who saw women arriving in foreign clothing, fancy cars, who went away with children. But it's clear that these women had the opportunity to access these children much more than the mothers themselves did. You can't explain the story without considering the role of race and racism. We're dealing with people, mostly from Europe, who are deciding the fates of the children from families from the Middle East, from North Africa, and from the Balkans. There is an unquestionable racial component to the judgments they're making. Every time they're deciding whether or not it's better for them to go back to their families or on to somewhere else.
To shed light on what James Eastwood calls the racial component, Gamal al-Maliki met an anthropology professor in California who specializes in Mizrahi studies. The Mizrahim were Jews who lived mainly in the Arab world. Mizrahi means Easterner in Hebrew.
And this is my granny about 40 years ago in the Passover ceremony in the Knesset, in International Women's. Maybe I should start with the framework for the issue. And the framework starts with the fact that Zionism gave Jews a homeland in Palestine. It was European Jews who had an idea of having a state which is Jewish and democratic. And it is contradictory to have a Jewish democracy because it assumes Jewish supremacy. And within Jewish supremacy, you have a race relation between Jews from Yiddish-speaking countries, or the Ashkenazim, and Jews who came mainly from the Muslim and Arab world. So in order to be a citizen in Israel, the citizenship is based on biologism and religion. In that sense, if you're a childless Ashkenazi, you'd better adopt a Jew baby that his Judaism has no doubt, or as the Hebrew saying goes, Yahaduto lo mutelet besafek. There is doubtless Judaism. Mizrahi Jews, particularly Yemeni Jews, didn't intermarry. So one is very sure that their babies are pure Jews, so they can fit into the citizenship model of Israel.
Shoshana Madmani Gerber is of Yemenite descent and echoes this view of a class hierarchy within Israeli society.
Just mostly people, European people, that were arriving and were instating these policies, and they were looking down at all the people that came to Israel from the Arab world. I asked one of the nurses, I said, how could you sleep at night? And she said to me, maybe we did them a favor. We did this because there's families without children that wanted children. And even another mother that we interviewed, she said, oh, the doctor told us these are nice children, but they the families can't help them, can't take care of them. They don't have enough money to take care of them. So they were thinking, you know, again, this is a very Orientalist way of thinking, a very racist way of thinking about who can be a parent and who cannot be a parent.
So actually, to have Jewish babies who are Mizrahi being trafficked or sold is a good business, because if you're an Ashkenazi childless Jewish family and you do not want to have problems of citizenship, you'd rather get a Jewish baby. And the other ideology is that Arabs or Muslims are primitive. They don't use contraceptives. They have large families. So they can do away with like 1, 2, 3 children as long as their skin color is light. So this was a logic of having pure Jews, Jewish babies, being traded or sold as pure citizens of the state.
יש ילד שידוע לנו שנגיד יגאל אלון, הביא במתנה. הלך כמו שהולכים לאמץ כלב, הוא הלך למעון כזה עם ילדים, והעביר ילד למשפחה שהוא רצה לעזור לה.
If the scope of intra-Jewish racism is known to the world, Israel is not going to have so much sympathy, particularly not from the Western Jewish community. So the acts of kidnapping babies and selling them for adoption, in a sense, if the scope of all of this is known to the Mizrahi publics, they are going to doubt the righteousness of Israel as a Jewish homeland.
When Israel was founded in 1948, it called on Jews to move there from Europe and America, but also from Arab countries, including Yemen. Jews of Yemeni heritage are known as Yemenite, and this story is about the strange disappearance of many Yemenite children and babies in the late 1940s and 50s. Families and campaigners believe they were stolen and given to Ashkenazi, that is, mainly European, Jewish families for adoption. Decades later, many Yemenite families of children thought to be dead received a call-up for Israeli military service.
אז כן, ואז שנים אחרי זה, נגיד, אתה חי עם הפצע הזה כל הזמן, לא יודע מה עם הילד שלך, אבל אמרו לך שהוא מת. ונגיד אפילו שאתה מאמין, ופתאום מגיע צו גיוס. אז גם איזה בלגן, כלומר, אמרתם שהוא מת, אז גם אם היה בלגן באותו רגע, איפה תעודת פטירה, איפה הקבר, למה כל הרישומים אינם, ואיך אתם מוציאים לו צו גיוס?
So they were thinking the fact that they were not erased, right, from the listings, that gave them hope that they were still alive, that they were not recorded as dead, because they were thinking if they actually died, then how are they still in all these lists, right? Why their names are still there as if they were alive. The military police came to their houses to ask, where is this child? So it signaled to the parents that we're talking about much larger phenomenon, and then the Yemeni community started to organize.
Gamal al-Maliki from Al Jazeera's Arabic channel spent months researching this disturbing story about what seems to be a form of child trafficking. He examined the work of 3 Israeli commissions of inquiry, spanning 35 years from 1967. During that time, the missing children cases became headline news in the Israeli media. The inquiries concluded that most of the missing babies had simply died, that some may have been adopted, and that there was no evidence of any abducted babies. Many Yemeni Jews living in Israel have strongly contended that the commissions of inquiry failed to do their job. The families and campaigners found a champion in Uzi Mushulam, an outspoken Yemenite rabbi. He led protests from his home in 1994, along with supporters who barricaded his property. Rabbi Meshulam claimed that over 4,500 Yemenite Jewish babies were stolen from their families and given to wealthy Israeli Jewish couples. Police arrested Meshulam on conspiracy and other charges, and he served 5 years in jail. One Israeli-born former human rights lawyer remembers Meshulam as a charismatic, unconventional figure.
Uzzah Meshulam was a rabbi, and he organized a bit of an organization around him of activists who were campaigning for discovering the truth about the disappearing children of Yemen. He started being active in the 1970s, but his main fame or notoriety arrived in the 90s when his people were out in the streets demonstrating, clashing with the police. There were quite a few incidents of clashes between the believers and disciples of Uzzah Meshulam and the police.
Gamal asked Daphna Baram about meeting Rabbi Meshulam and what they talked about.
I really believed that Yemenite children were kidnapped. When the lawyer I was working for, Leah Tzemel, who normally represented Palestinians in military courts and so on, suddenly decided to represent Meshulam, I didn't like it. I thought, I don't know, this guy is a little bit crazy. There is a vibe around him that doesn't sound very credible. I don't know if we should do that. But I was a junior, internship girl in the office. So I went with it. I was curious also because it was a big famous story. And I went with her to visit him in prison. It was not a long time before he died. And he was sitting there and we were talking to him. And I must say that over the period when we were representing him, and I was reading a lot of testimonies and was talking to a lot of the people who were active around him, I got more and more convinced that him and his people have a point.
Rabbi Meshulam's high-profile campaign came after 2 of the official Israeli inquiries into the affair. The Israeli government then launched a 3rd inquiry. The Cohen-Kedmi Commission began work in 1995 and continued for 6 years. While it went further than the previous 2 inquiries, it still maintained that the missing children had died in medical care. Many of the Yemenite families and campaigners simply didn't accept this.
הוועדות לא חשדו בשלטון. שופטים ורופאים זה מאותה אליטה. ובעצם מה שעשה משולם זה הכריח את המדינה לעשות עוד ועדת חקירה. אבל כשאתה לא חושד שיש פשע, וכשאתה מאמין למדינה, וכשתיקים נעלמים יום לפני שאתה מבקש אותם, או פתאום יש שריפה, או פתאום מחסלים עדויות.
Documents that we've seen, they are useful. You can learn things from them. But there are also many questions about those. For example, many of the archives that would have been most important for the commission went missing or were destroyed after these events took place. In other cases, we have the copies of the archival documents, but the names of the children are removed or redacted. And this makes it very hard to use them to reach the conclusions that we would like. So I think it seems clear to me that there was a desire on the part of those who wrote the commission report to give an answer which was that there's nothing to worry about. You were told the truth. It may have been delivered to you in the wrong way, but we can now confirm to you that the story you were told 70 years ago is accurate and your children sadly died.
ומאז והלאה אנחנו כמו שאומרים, כמו כולם מחפשים, והיינו בכל הוועדות ושום דבר לא עזר. ואבא שלי גם פנה למשטרה וזה לא עזר. והם רק כל הזמן קיבלו תגובה שהילדה מתה, זה הכל.
Bacha Itaki was invited to appear before the 1995 Cohen-Kedmi Commission.
הייתי בוועדת קדמי, נדמה לי שהיה שם השופט השין. הוא שאל אותי את כל השאלות, ואני עניתי לו וסיפרתי לו. את כל מה שהשתלשלות, כל העניינים. ואני לא חושבת שמישהו כתב את זה כמו שצריך. ראיתי שעומד בפניי באמת בן אדם טוב שרוצה לעזור. אבל ותו לא. אני בטוחה שידיו היו כבולות. אני משוכנעת. רק לטייח ולמרוח, שום ועדה לא הייתה. סתם. כדי להגיד, עשינו משהו. הנה, לא שלא דאגנו ולא עשינו כלום. אז סתם.
So what of the different commission's findings? That all these babies simply died from a range of illnesses. Gamal al-Moleki asked about the role of the health institutions at that time.
In the hospitals, there were widespread reports of overcrowding. Too many children coming to the hospitals, not enough beds. And many of the children, they report, are well. Rather than sending the children back to the camps, instead, the hospitals seek other solutions because they do not trust the parents to look after the children now they're recovered. And so they reach out to the welfare ministry and to women's organizations, especially WITZO, the Women's International Zionist Organization. And they send many of the children to baby homes in major cities, in Tel Aviv, in Safed, in Jerusalem. And we know at the time that these were really important institutions for the arrangement of adoptions. And it's strongly suspected that in many cases, the children that ultimately disappeared were in fact given up for adoption in this way.
Al Jazeera contacted WITZO, the Women's International Zionist Organization. We asked them to respond to allegations from the late 1940s and early 50s that WITZO may have been involved in the irregular adoption of Yemenite babies without their parents' consent. WITZO did not reply.
המעורבות של הממסד הרפואי זה החל באמת הרופאים והאחיות שהיו במעברות עצמם, שהוציאו את הילדים, האמבולנסים שהעבירו אותם, ואז בתי החולים ששמרו או לא שמרו, או ניתקו את הקשר מההורים. ובחלק מהמקרים, אם וכאשר הילד נפטר, אנחנו אף פעם לא נדע איזה ילד כן נפטר ואיזה ילד נלקח, שעשו את זה בלי לידע את ההורים. בלי לתעד איפה, מה. ולפעמים העבירו אותם, כשהילדים החלימו, העבירו אותם למעונות, כמו של ויצו, גם בלי להודיע את ההורים, בלי שרשרת מעקב כזו שתאפשר את החזרה של הילד להורים שלו.
It's over 70 years since these Yemenite Jewish children disappeared after their arrival in Israel. One senior Israeli former health official says that what happened needs to be seen in the context of conditions at the time.
שורה התחתונה בסופו של דבר אומרת שהייתה פעילות של אנשי מערכת הבריאות, שנגיד עוד פעם, שוב, אני רוצה להגיד את זה מאוד בזהירות, כי יש הרבה מאוד ויכוח על העובדות, קודם כל. אבל אני אתחיל אולי בתיאור העובדות הבסיסיות ביותר שלדעתי יש קונסנזוס רחב עליהן, וזה למעשה שהביאו למעשה עולים מתימן ועולים מהרבה מדינות, גם ממדינות אירופה, כן? הגיעו הרבה פעמים למחנות, ובעצם היו במחנות מעבר, או מה שקוראים לזה מעברות אצלנו בעצם, היו באותן מעברות, ובאותן מעברות היו שיעורים גבוהים מאוד של תחלואה, תת-תזונה וכל מיני בעיות כאלה שקשורות גם לעוני שהיה שם וגם לצפיפות וגם למחלות שהיו יותר נפוצות בכלל בישראל באותו זמן. ברור שתמותת התינוקות הייתה מאוד גבוהה, זה לא כמו היום שיש לנו פחות.
It's hard to explain today the scale and importance of what happened and how anyone could justify the removal of babies from one particular ethnic group with the blessing of the authorities, and that they were given up for adoption without their parents' consent.
This clearly was a systematic occurrence because it cannot be anything else. Something that happens over several years, so that cannot be a mistake. Again, a mistake is something that happens once, not when it occurs over and over again.
Basically, it was a very well-organized network. So it was a systemic business. The committees cover it up because they have parents or who might have gotten adopted kids. They have aunties or sisters who were social workers who gave a rubber stamp for the adoption. So it was the whole institution basically dealt with this trafficking of children.
כן, אני יכול להגיד שבוודאות אפשר לומר שבעצם הורים, שהילד נגיד היה חולה באיזושהי מחלה או משהו כזה, אז קודם כל היה טיפול בתוך המחנה, ולקחו אותו לאיזשהו מקום טיפול בתוך המחנה, ואז בדרך כלל זה היה בסדר. לפעמים היה צריך להביא אותו לבית חולים. אז אם היו לוקחים את הילד לבית חולים, היה לוקחים אותו אמבולנס. מן הסתם, בתי חולים היו ממרחקים של הרבה קילומטרים, האמא או האבא היו צריכים לעבור ברגל כדי לראות אותו, אז היו באים פעם ביום, במקרה הטוב, כי לא היה קשה להם להגיע, שגם ילדים שאחרים צריך לטפל בהם.
If you remove a child from their parents without that parent's consent and do not return it to them and do not explain to that parent what happened and give them a full account of what happened to that child, you have kidnapped that child. And I think if you look at the system, you can see that there was a clear pattern, a set of attitudes, a clear connection between different institutions, a clear set of priorities to move children away from their parents and towards institutions that were putting children up for adoption. That speaks to a pattern of institutionalized kidnapping. This wasn't an accident. These weren't mistakes. This was a system. And the system should be held to account.
זה נכון שהיה באמת מדינה בהקמה, זו הייתה תקופה מאוד מאוד מורכבת, ואפשר להגיד בלגן, כן, במובנים מסוימים, ויחד עם זאת, קודם כל, אני חושב שנושא רישום הרפואי זה משהו שהוא חלק מהטיפול הרפואי, לכן גם העובדה שהיום אין חלק מהתיעוד הרפואי הוא גם בעייתי.
There was no chaos in the refugee camps or in the transit camps of the Yemenis, the Moroccans. It was so organized that if people, when they checked out of the camp, if they lost a teaspoon, they were charged for it.
Years passed, and the Yemenite families still had no closure. As a sign that the affair was starting to be taken more seriously, however, it was debated in the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, in 2023. MPs on all sides called for meaningful answers to the questions it raised.
בשנת 1952 הגיעו סבו וסבתו, יוסף ובסיאנה, וילדתם רחל, לבקר קרובי משפחה באור יהודה. רחל הייתה בת שנתיים. היא לא חשה בטוב, ולכן הוריה לקחו אותה לבית חולים תל השומר. בבית החולים אמרו להוריה של רחל שמדובר בעניין רפואי פשוט. אבל רחל חייבת להישאר את הלילה באשפוז. אשר חזרו למחרת בבוקר, נאמר להם כי הילדה מתה. אבל אין תעודת פטירה, וכמובן שאין גופה. אחרי שבועות רבים, בהם הם ניסו לקבל איזשהו מסמך או קבר, הם הרימו ידיים, התייאשו. עוד סיפור אחד מתוך מאות ואלפי סיפורים שתצאים ועולים מזה שנים על ידי משפחות בכל רחבי הארץ. למרות שהפרשה הכואבת הזאת התרחשה לפני עשרות שנים, הפצע עדיין פתוח, ומשפחות רבות עדיין לא יודעות איפה הילדים והילדות שלהם. משפחות רבות עדיין מחכות בביתן לילד שנעלם, מחכות לקבל תשובה רשמית או הוכחה למה שקרה.
לנצל את הבמה הזו, חשובה הזו של הכנסת, כדי לבקש ממך סליחה על המונסי בשבילה. סליחה על כך שמדינת ישראל בזה לך ורצפה אותך. זה היה איתך, שהכאב שהפגנת לא היה פרי הדמיון, שאכן נעשו דברים שלא נעשו. שאכן הייתה מדיניות של הסתרה, שהיה רצון לטייח ולהסתיר את הדברים שנעשו.
Gamal al-Maliki asked what needed to be done in order for the whole affair to reach a conclusion.
I don't think I tend to be on the pessimistic side. I don't think there is going to be a solution. The history is being transmitted from generation to generation of the tragedy. But unfortunately, I do not see it bringing about a structural change in the racial formation and the racial hierarchies of Israel.
אין אפשרות להכחיש את הטרגדיה שעברו משפחות רבות. אך יש אפשרות להגיע להכרה, צדק וריפוי. הילדים לא היו סובייקט שנעלם מעצמו. הייתה כאן העלמה ולה עדויות רבות. לאחרונה פורסמו ממצאי מחקרו של דוקטור דניאל בן מלאך, שמצביעים על כשלים מהותיים בעבודת הוועדות שבדקו את הפרשה. הוא גילה שמסמכי הפטירה והקבורה, שעל בסיסה קבעה הוועדה שהילדים נפטרו זמן קצר לאחר שנעלמו, מפוקפקים מאוד, ויש מקום להניח שחלק ניכר מהם שגוי או מזויף. בנוסף מצא שוועדת החקירה הונתה את הסיפור. במקום לחשוף את הבעיות במסמכים ולנסות להסביר למה הם בכל זאת תקפים, היא הציגה מצג שווא כאילו הם אמיתיים ותקפים ללא רבב. למרות זאת, גם מהוועדות עצמן וגם התחקירים בנושא בתקשורת עולה תמונה קשה וברורה של רשלנות, התנהגות גזענית וזלזול מוחלט במשפחות.
And that's where this story now stands. Allegations, evidence, and suffering, but no accountability or closure. In 2021, the Israeli government expressed regret to the families from Yemen, other Arab countries, and the Balkans. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu recognized what he called, quote, the terrible suffering the families went through, but he fell short of a formal apology. The government announced a compensation scheme for the families, but a condition of the $45 million offer is that the families must drop all legal claims against the state.
My reaction is that it's another way to try to put an artificial closure. So instead of actually telling the truth, instead of actually apologizing, instead of asking for forgiveness in public, they're trying to do it one family at a time, like that. Like, here, a little money, masari shwaye batisketu.
יש פה שיטה, גם בגזזת, גם באנטרקס וגם פה. קחו כסף וסתמו את הפה, ואז המדינה גם תגיד שהיא פעלה לפנים משורת הדין, וגם באנטרקס וגם בכל פרשה היא תגיד, פעלתי לפנים משורת הדין, בלי לקבל אחריות, בלי אחריות זה לא עובד יותר. כאילו, אני חושבת שזה לא... זה נראה כמו, באמת, זרקתם לנו כסף ותסתמו את הפה, כמו דמי שתיקה.
Al Jazeera contacted the Israeli Health Ministry. We asked about allegations of involvement in irregular adoptions and possible state-sanctioned child trafficking, about whether the different commissions of inquiry may have covered up the irregular adoptions, and why documents that might clarify events remain classified. The Ministry of Health didn't reply.
אוקיי, המתווה לפיצוי זה משהו שהממשלה הציעה, שבעצם קודם כל לא נוגע לרוב המשפחות, ושרוב המשפחות לא פנו, הרבה משפחות לא פנו לוועדת החקירה, ומכיוון שלא פנו, לא נקבע שילדם מת. והמתווה הזה רק רלוונטי למשפחות שקבעו שילדם מת. הרבה פעמים המידע שנתנו להם הוא מידע לא אמין. כמו שאמרתי, יש סתירות בין המידע שבידי המדינה לבין המידע שבידי משפחות, ולא מסבירים את הבסיס לסתירות האלה.
Hard facts and accurate information are at the heart of this affair. The Third Commission of Inquiry in 2001 classified hundreds of thousands of documents. Some were declassified in 2016, but others will remain secret until 2071.
אני מקווה שהפעם באמת יצליחו, שהממשלות באמת כבר יחליטו סוף סוף לפתוח את כל התיקים האלה כמו שצריך, את האמת. הבעיה שאנחנו רוצים לדעת את האמת. כסף, מה הכסף? הם עושים צחוק עם הכסף? פרוטות? זה לא בושה? אני צריכה את האחות שלי, אני לא צריכה את הפרוטות. לא אני ולא אחותי השנייה. אחותי הגדולה כבר בינתיים נפטרה. אבל שתינו נשארנו ואנחנו רוצות למצוא אותה. גם אנחנו מצפות כל יום. אולי איזה טלפון יגיע, אולי איזה מכתב. פרסמנו כמה פעמים כשהיינו, ולא עזר כלום. אתה יודע מה זה לחיות עם זה? זה פצע בלב שלו מגליד, הוא כל הזמן רק מדמם.
Gamal al-Maliki and his team's study of the Yemenite Children Affair ended with a gathering of victims and their families, an occasion to support each other and to share their stories. The victims say they seek only the truth. Yet after over 7 decades, it's the truth about one of the most controversial and sensitive issues in Israeli society that remains elusive.